Kimberly Bryant. So nice to have you sitting here at the hot seat. How are you?
Hi, I'm well. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be in conversation with you, Denise.
That's brilliant. So, Kimberly, you are a lady of action, I have to say, real fighter. So, you have been running for the past decade Black Girls Code,
Yes.
CEO and founder.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about Black Girls Code.
So Black Girls Code is a nonprofit organization that was founded back in 2011, right here in the Bay Area, but further up the road in San Francisco, if you will. And it's an organization that was created really to get girls from underrepresented communities engaged in the tech industry and Web2 as digital creators and innovators. And it grew really from this, I want to say, this issue that I saw in the space through the lens of my daughter, who was, budding. Now she's an entrepreneur, but then she was just a budding computer programmer. And I really did not, see a lot of other opportunities for her to be engaged with other little girls that were learning about, gaming and game programming at the time.
Okay.
And so I created the organization really initially just so she could have a community of other little girls that had the same interest. And it grew from there into this, international organization with chapters all across the U.S.
So, I mean, it's crazy because I feel like the sooner you get to close these gaps, the more opportunities you're going to give this next generation of young girls of color. So amazing. You've received tons of awards for the work that you do. And you also have a 2-decade career in engineering and as a technical leader. So we're going to talk a little bit about why Web3 should be different and what the responsibilities are in that. There is a lot of skeptics, as I saw from your Twitter conversation.
Right.
But in your opinion, what are the biggest failings in the web as we know it today?
Oh,
Ooh.
wow. So I think, when you reached out to me the other day about, my feelings about Web3 and this conversation, I was like, oh, well, Denise, you look at my Twitter because I had a big conversation about this the other day.
True.
And one of the things that I expressed in that conversation was, there was a lot of pushback from folks who or Web3 protagonists, if you will, or they're folks that have been building in Web2 for a very long time. And they were not fans of where Web3 was going, and they did not think it was the future of technology. And it was like, we already have these things in Web2.
Sure.
And I was like, yeah, we do. But I have been dedicating the last 10 years of my life trying to level the playing field for women as well as women and people of color, and hoping to create this pipeline, if you will, of diversity in tech. And I said, but it's not working. It hasn't changed. It's actually, in many cases, the numbers in terms of diversity for women and particularly for people of color in the tech industry has actually declined over the last 10 years. So for me, it's been somewhat of I would say a disappointing and frustrating pathway because we and other organizations like us have done so much hard work to really create this next generation of coders. And when we look at the numbers for inclusion right now, they're really less than when we started 10 years ago. And so for me, I think the biggest issue in Web2 is the lack of diversity and inclusion.
Okay.
And particularly from the standpoint of not enough builders and creators and founders who come from marginalized communities. And when I think of the possibilities of Web3, I think, well, here's an opportunity for us not to have to run to catch up with the bus, but for us to maybe get on the bus before the bus gets going and maybe take a seat at the front of the bus. Heck, I'll take a seat at the middle of the bus.
For sure.
Because from Web2, we're not even on the bus. We're trying to run to catch up to a bus, and it's been a very long road trying to make just a little bit of progress. And so I think this issue around diversity as well as ownership in Web2 is the thing that we most have to solve for in Web3.
Yeah, I mean, look, I almost feel like there's never going to be anything built perfectly, but this is a new opportunity to maybe get closer to all these issues that you're talking about, and they're real home truths here.
Right.
It's not like we're just saying, you know, this is not good, but you're really experiencing these issues firsthand,
Yes.
and you see an opportunity to tackle them. So what is the evolution from Web 1 and Web 2 into Web 3?
Right. So I think when we look at, you know, the evolution to where we are today or where we're going, I think of this like through how I began my journey in technology. So I went to school into college in the mid 80s. So mid 80s to 1989 is when I actually started on my pathway as an electrical engineer, minor in computer science. And I remember vividly at that moment when I graduated, I was on my first job in 1989, 1990, and someone came into my office and said, there's this thing called the internet, and you gotta look at this and take a look. And that really was the beginning of this Web 1 era of the internet, if you will. And it was still, you know, primarily community driven in terms of what was being created on it, and it was still somewhat decentralized in terms of how it was built as a network. It was very new.
Sure.
A lot of it had come out of, you know, governmental agencies, and it was just starting to break into personal individual usage of it as a tool. Very beginning. Same thing in terms of like even the personal computer. I remember when Apple was just becoming a thing, and I remember having Apple stock when it was like $4. I didn't keep it, unfortunately.
Anyone else out here got on any Apple stock at the time?
Oh my
No,
God.
just Kimberly then.
It's one of my worst regrets in life. But, you know, this was the era when we were just becoming personalization around the web, so to speak.
Sure.
And I think when we look at that period post Web 1 as like 2005 and Web 2, no, that was a different era. That was this era where the social network became predominant, and we had the big major players, you know, Google and Facebook, and these social networks were very centralized and very closed platforms where ownership was very segmented among these power players. And we as users and consumers were very much so commodities. Like, I don't think we recognized that we were commodities in the beginning, but I think we all recognize it now.
Yeah.
And as we got into these issues over the last, you know, several, I would say between 2005 and 2020, these issues around access and ownership to our personal data and how that data was being used. So I think this era, and it's interesting when I look at a lot of my work through the lens of my pathway as an adult and moving into my purpose alongside my daughters.
Sure.
So when I was, you know, graduating from college, you know, it was a long time before I even thought about having my daughter. But as she became what I consider a digital native, she's born in 1999, and she kind of grew up in this Web 2 era, but she has matured into this era of Web 3. And it's interesting because even my work with Black Girls Code has really been around initially just giving her access to learn these tools to code and maybe go work for a Google or a Facebook. I remember vividly when we started Black Girls Code in 2012, and we took our girls to a very first, this was when Facebook was down here, didn't have this big Disney-like campus.
Sure.
And we took them to the Facebook offices, but it still seemed like a different world to them and a place that they wanted to be. And then we took them to Google, and then it was like Disneyland. And so what we were trying to introduce our students to at that point was how they could become, I want to say, a participant, if you will. That would be a good way to say it. A participant in the industry, and only have acceptance into this world of technology, but not ownership. now that, my daughter has matured and she is graduating computer scientist, she's also a crypto artist and she's very much engaged in the world of Web3.
Yeah.
And her mindset has transitioned from this one of wanting to go work for Google to what can I create of my own.
Exactly.
And I think that is when why I am bullish on Web3 is because I think it gives us a way to look at the world through a different lens in this next era of technology in a way that we can assert ownership and a
Absolutely.
shared structure of sharing power in a way that Web 2 has never been able to provide. And I think that's why it's an opportunity to perhaps level the playing field a little
Yeah.
bit.
Well, I mean, I like that you are taking on all of these skeptical opinions and saying, sure, this is good. We're getting all these different opinions, but why aren't we at least looking at it? Like you said, let's just get in the middle of the bus.
Right.
And that works. And a lot of the things that you're saying make a lot of sense, at least as we are talking more and more about Web3 during these sessions. The creative and the ownership have kind of come together in this new wave. So that's very, very interesting. Do you think there is a clear path for diversity, equity, and inclusion in Web3?
Perhaps.
Okay.
So I say perhaps from this standpoint that I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic. So back in 2018, my organization, Black Girls Code, was approached by a group of Black and Hispanic engineers that were working for an organization called Consensus. And they came to us and were like, hey, we have this new technology called blockchain, and we want to train some of your girls at Black Girls Code about it. We did not know what blockchain was. We were just like, okay, maybe, tell us a little bit about it. And we started on this journey where, these engineers from Consensus came in and over the course of a summer taught our girls about smart contracts, taught them how to create their own tokens. And we started to take these same group of girls and then more to the DevCon conference. I think the first year we went to the one in Prague, and the next year we went to the one in Osaka. And it was by the time that we went to the DevCon conference in Osaka that I sat in the room and it first occurred to me that this was a potential possibility. And I remember sharing and I was like, oh, now I get it. Like, this is what freedom looks like.
Oh, cool.
Because in this room, there were still a lot of people that did not look like our girls who came from East Oakland, West Oakland, et cetera, across Detroit, Atlanta, Georgia. We were a small pocket of diversity. But they were learning tools in a way that a democratized internet could look like, with folks that were from Russia, folks that were from the Caribbean. And I saw that very differently from how they entered the room and entered the space in Web 2. It was very different from a shared view of how power and tools were being shared. And so I say that I'm cautiously optimistic because I think now that everyone is talking about blockchain, everybody is talking about NFTs, everybody's talking about crypto, I think it provides an opportunity for access and ownership in ways that we did not have such a hurdle to push when we were starting Black Girls Code in 2011. I think people see the opportunity that we have in Web3, and people are interested in getting in it. People who may not even want to be a coder per se, see an opportunity to participate in Web3, either as an owner of an NFT, trading cryptocurrencies, or utilizing cryptocurrency to send money across in global South areas. I think that is why I see it as a possibility to have a more diverse ecosystem in the future than we have had in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the unbanked are benefiting so much from crypto and this space for a while now. And it's refreshing to hear a perspective of somebody who has actually lived through the evolution, not just, I'm skeptical, I don't know, I understand the technology, but I don't believe in it. So, you've been there.
Right.
So you're not just talking the talk, you've walked the walk,
No, I
right?
mean, I think that, oftentimes I hear these complaints, well, this is nothing new. They're still the same players, and these companies from Web2 would not be investing in Web3
Sure.
if it was an opportunity to democratize the internet. And I hear all that, and in there's certain ways I agree. But I think it's important that we have women at the seat of the table, building the
Absolutely.
table in Web3. I think it's important that we have people of color at the table when the table is being built, because we have expertise and talents to bring in shaping this industry in a way that may not happen if we are not there. So for me, it seems very critical that we are participants and that we not be left out.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. So responsibility means different things to different people, especially to large corporations, as you've mentioned. How can building out this new layer of web truly be built differently?
I think one of the challenges that probably everyone in this room would agree with, that we have faced in Web 2 is the lack of, I think there needs to be some control. So I think the lack of regulation in many ways has been the Achilles heel for Web 2.
Okay.
And I think a potential benefit of Web 3 is the lack of regulation.
True.
But I think, unfortunately, one of the things that we've seen is that there are a lot of bad actors in the space, and people who don't have protections are losing things. People losing money is being lost. There's a lot of schemes and scams that have proliferated in the industry. So I think, however, though, perhaps this is an opportunity for us maybe not to look for deep governmental regulation, but to figure out how do we regulate ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's the work of this next phase, is very different. It's like figuring out how do we transition from a power structure that looks for government control to regulate how things run in these systems. Now, how do we re-envision that if we're the ones that are going to democratize how power moves? That's more difficult than, depending on an external entity. But that really is the work, is how do we change and revolutionize systems of control and regulation in a way that it creates access and control as a community.
Yeah, and I also think there's bad actors everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's not just on the web.
No.
If there is an opportunity to do something bad, you'll always find people who will take advantage of that too. So it's a little bit of, the critics versus the positive. So talking a little bit more about that, you've commented on marginalized communities and how they're not really looking at the opportunities of this. So how do you think how could they prepare to participate beneficially in the opportunities presented?
Well, I actually do think marginalized communities are looking at this as an opportunity. One of the things that I have been most familiar with is the creative community, the creative class of developers who have been a part of Web3. As I said before, my daughter is a crypto artist, and I have been exposed to her artist community. And I think the way I have seen art transition into this NFT, digital asset mode, from digital artists, photographers, musicians who traditionally would have been on a path to, go to a record label, try to get a deal, maybe be a starving artist. And now these folks are creating a path for creating a living and a life by selling and transacting and trading their work on the blockchain.
Sure.
I think that's revolutionary because, again, it goes back to this notion, and I keep coming back to it, is a transition in how we look at power. Who are the gatekeepers or who are not the gatekeepers? When I was in this conversation on Twitter the other day, and I was like, well, no, do you know any NFT artists that are Black? Because, I know many of them, and they are making a living by selling their work. And someone was like, well, no, but you don't need NFTs for these artists to make money. Like, and I was like, well, what would we use instead? There's like, well, there's things like Patreon and PayPal. I was like, you gotta be kidding me, right? I was like, those systems have been around forever. And I know very few artists who have made a living by setting up a Patreon account. I know very few.
Okay.
And those that do, then they are resigned to creating these works on commission and not really letting their creative freedoms, come to scale, and just building and creating what they want and then putting it there and see who is interested in it. And I am also an avid tangible art collector. This is what I do. Like for most of 2020 and 2021, I spend less time on Amazon, more time buying art, like
That's
tangible
wonderful.
art.
Especially for artists, that's super wonderful.
Certainly we're off for them, but I spend a lot of time buying art. And so like, this is the world even before NFTs that I know. And I was like, let me tell you, for Black artists that I collect, it's difficult for me to even get in the room to purchase one of their works. I was like, it's a fight for me, and I am an art collector. And when I am in those rooms, there are very few other art collectors that look like me.
Yeah.
There are lots of institutions and a lot of collectors who come from very different demographics than the ones of the artists themselves. And it is an industry that is absolutely behind a gate. So a non-trained artist that just has a passion for creating, they might not actually have their art at a gallery that is, exhibiting at Miami for Art Basel, but they could put their art up on an NFT and actually be able to create a name and a branding for themselves. Yeah. And not only that, once an artist sells a work, a tangible piece of work, that I collect art not only just because I love it, but that art often increases in value. So once I own that, oh, how I wish, Kerry James Marshall piece of artwork, I'm gonna hold that because in some years from now, it could be worth quite a bit more than what I pay for because it tends to appreciate in value. The benefit of the blockchain and NFTs is because it gives those same artists an opportunity to appreciate in terms of getting back money or residual commissions as their art is resold on the chain. 100%. That's not something that artists in the tangible world are privy to. So a Kerry James Marshall work that he created 20 years ago is reselling on the open market for tens of millions of dollars, and he is not getting any part of that. Yeah. And that's not okay. So I think for me, again, I keep coming back to this notion about the innovations in Web3 as a tool for democratization of the web, of digital assets and tools, and being able to create a more level playing field in ways and even in ways that we traditionally have done business that we have never been privy to before.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually, if you look at it simplistically, it's just a new channel.
Yes.
It's a new channel for people to be able to do things and have ownership of the things that they're doing. So, however you choose to use it is really up to the individual, but it just presents this new channel for artists, as you say, for creating. What do you think are the biggest positives, although you've talked a lot about the good stuff that's going on?
Well, I think some of the biggest positives is that we do have a diverse creative class that are participating in Web3, which is very different than when Web1 was in its heyday and Web2 as well. And I think being able to pull individuals that are building on the web from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from the US, it allows us to innovate in a way and actually put users at the seat of this table as creators in ways that we have never been able to do before. On the downside, I think we would be foolish not to address some of the issues that often come up around energy usage and how I want to say this in a way. How unfriendly to the environment Web3 is by its nature. But even with that, I believe that is an opportunity also for us to innovate
100%.
and bring people into this space that can help us figure out how to create on the chain and how to do it in an economically as well as an environmentally friendly way.
Yeah, I feel almost like there will be solutions that are more environment friendly coming now that this has become an issue and such an important topic with the environment as well. So what advice would you give anybody who is looking to get into Web3 and start to build products or even just with their NFTs? And
Yes, I will want to say, find your tribe or find your DAO. Find that group of individuals to build with. I think it's important as this space continues to evolve. I am still learning about the space. I learned things even from my daughter. My daughter's 23. She's teaching me about this space. Now the student has become the teacher.
Okay.
So I think be in a mode of continuous learning about the space. I think there's an importance around being very cautious because there still is a lot of, there's a lot of
Say it nicely.
There's a lot of bad actors in this space. So I think it's also important to be very cautious in terms of how you move in this space.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing what I would say would be to really give yourself some space to find out where you want to build and grow in the space and put some time and effort and energy into that. For me, part of the reason, I would say my dilemmas as I have learned more about Web3 and sought to get into the space more is because I am very worried about our environment. That is something that matters to me. So that conflict is something that consistently concerns me because I do see this as the wave of the future from innovation, or a wave, maybe not the wave,
Okay.
a wave. But I'm also very conscious about how we live on this earth and how we protect our environment. And so one of the things I decided this week, even in the midst of this Twitter battle, if you will, was like, let me figure out how I can immerse myself in learning more so that I can teach more and so that I can help this next generation of technologists be environmentally conscious in how they build in this space and bring some of those environmental friendly solutions to the forefront.
That's super awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, all the work that you have done, it's people like you who are game changers. And when I was looking through what you're calling a Twitter battle, you handled it with such grace, and everybody was having a conversation rather than attacking, which is very rarely seen when you start something on Twitter and not everybody agrees, right?
Right.
So what is your next phase with Black Girls Code?
Well, I think for me, it's really in this phase of transitioning to what's next. And part of it will absolutely be doing something in Web3. I think over the last 10 years, I have been so laser focused on teaching girls how to code that I see this next phase of creating those founders who are building what's next in Web3, Web4, whatever is in the pipeline for innovation. So for me, my goal is to really look at how I can create pathways to both teach, learn, and fund founders building in Web3 and support women, especially women in marginalized communities as founders.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kimberly. And I mean, I can't say enough how proud I am to be sitting here next to you. I mean, I traveled a long way to come here, so I was not expecting to meet someone like you.
Yes.
It's been amazing. Thank you again for the work that you do. It really does change people's lives. I know that firsthand too.
Yes.
So let's give Kimberly a massive round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.